everyone. Welcome back to another continuing education check-in. Sania, I apologize, but I forced you to talk about this topic, and it's going to be a heavy one. And today we're talking about abuse and kind of narrowing it down a little bit and talking about how to tell if someone is abusive.
Okay.
And so I think this is an important topic because I think in our day and age, it's becoming easier and easier to tell if someone is being toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys have been listening all this time and listening to all the toxicology reports, you guys are pretty much experts now.
Mm.
But I think when it comes to abuse, it's a lot harder to tell.
Mm.
And so I think that this would be really helpful for a lot of people just to prevent you from getting into a bad situation. But we'll also talk a little bit later on what to do if you think your friend might be in this situation and what kinds of questions you can ask.
Mm-hmm.
So this episode is all about that. We're going to wrap things up with what would ChatGPT do and ask ChatGPT how to tell if someone is abusive too. And so, Sania, I want to start by asking if we think we're good at reading people and if we think that we can tell if someone is abusive just by observing them.
I think as like a third person looking into somebody else's relationship, it's easier to do that because you don't have any emotional entanglements. But I feel like being in a situation yourself and like, you know, having your friends tell you like, oh, this is probably abusive, like you should not be in this situation, like it's harder to see it when it's happening to you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that I've learned that really caught me off guard when I first learned it is that someone who is abusive, how they act in public is very different than how they act in private. And so a lot of times, like, if I'm there, I'm a third party. To add to you, I don't have emotional entanglement, but I also, they're kind of putting on their best face.
Right.
And it's really hard to see, like, when they're lashing out and being cruel to their partner.
Right.
And in private, they're just like this completely other person. And so I think that's one of the first points that we want to make, that right off the bat, if you're just observing someone in public or when you're in a group setting, it's really hard to tell. And so even if you are the one experiencing abuse, don't feel like you're delusional. Like everyone, it's hard for everyone to see right off the bat.
Right.
And we're going to give you some strategies in this episode to kind of counter that. So even if you suspect something and the stories just seem a little off, or sometimes like you see like little signs, how to dig a little deeper. And I think a good way to start us off is by defining the different kinds of abuse. Okay. And we can kind of talk about them and talk about like how they kind of show up in a relationship. And so the forms of abuse include physical, sexual, emotional, financial, spiritual, extreme neglect, and deception. So this is a list that we found 7 types. And do you think, Sania, that this is like pretty thorough? Do you think that this is missing anything?
I feel like it covers like all general like aspects of abuse, and like a lot of these can be like going hand in hand, like together, to paint a bigger picture. Ethan, as you were reading the list, I was just thinking about like, you know, in my mind, like immediately like examples started popping up of like, you know, when these happen. And I was like surprised to see spiritual abuse on the list, because I don't think or like even extreme neglect, I didn't think that those were like signs of abuse.
Me too, especially the last one, deception. And I think something that I want to point out that is important is that when it comes to abuse, there are patterns of these things. These things happen repeatedly.
Okay.
And so, of course, like, I think all of us can think of examples of this in our life.
Yeah.
But when it comes to an abusive relationship, we're looking for something repeated. But I know what you mean, because and let's break down like those ones that are less obvious to us, but like spiritual abuse, I think that's very valid. Like maybe you are religious and your partner is not, or they practice a different religion. I think a lot of times like they can belittle you or like restrict you from practicing your religion.
Okay.
And I think that is a form of abuse when it's taken to an extreme. And they are actually restricting you or bullying you for what you believe in. And then extreme neglect. This one is interesting because, like, is it subjective? What is extreme?
Right.
But, like, even, like, not replying to someone to make them understand that you're upset at them, or ignoring them for weeks at a time so that you can, like, hang out with your friends or go on trips. Sorry.
No, I was saying, or to try to prove a point, like ignoring them just like out of spite, like just to make them feel bad.
And I think that's like taking silent treatment and then putting it to the extreme. And I think a lot of these, like, maybe we've experienced hints of it, shades of it, but these are all like taken to another level.
Right. Like I think the big thing you said is consistent. Like, do I consistently give silent treatment when I get upset? Yes, but I try to make it not last very long, or I try to fix it, or I communicate to my partner, like, I struggle to speak to you when I'm upset, or like whatever, as opposed to like, I feel like when it's done in like an abusive way, you're doing it kind of with intent to make the other person feel bad, and like without communicating to them, without it being like, this is just like how I cope with things, like, you know?
I feel like that is a common pattern, that they're always able to justify their behavior. And then I think the last one, deception, this one is really important because I think from the outside, it just, you're like, oh, this person's being toxic. They are hiding stuff, or they're gaslighting me. But I think this is like something that is easy to take to the extreme, where you're kind of living a life outside of your relationship and just hiding stuff. So maybe you're hiding debt, or you're hiding an addiction, or you're hiding someone else that you're seeing on the side. And all those things, even though it seems like that's on you and something that you're dealing with yourself, it affects your partner, because all of a sudden they're not sure what to believe in anymore. They're not sure where you are at and what you're going through. And it actually, like, the mental burden on your partner, I think, is really high when you're not telling them exactly what's going on in your life, especially if they're asking. And I think one of the worst feelings in the world is feeling like you know something, but then the other person's not admitting that you're right, or that you're onto something.
I feel like all of these tie very easily into emotional abuse. I feel like that one's kind of like a tricky one. Like, I don't want to say I'm reading this list and feeling called out, but it's like, I feel like you said, we've all experienced or exhibited some of these behaviors to a smaller scale, like in our relationships. But I guess like we're trying to define like, when is it too much? When is it like now becoming abusive? Like, do you never, ever, ever admit that you're wrong? Are you always just going to gaslight your partner into thinking that they're the problem and they're doing stuff wrong? Like, or do you sometimes, you know, use those good sentences that Ethan tells us, like, I did this and I feel this, and like, you know, stuff like that, using like our awareness wheel to solve problems.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll have to dig a little into that on where to draw the line. And I think something that will help us is what are the signs of abuse. And so what can we look for in our own relationships, but then also in the relationships of our friends? And what are the signs that someone is abusive? One thing that I want to highlight is, at the very beginning we mentioned how someone who is an abuser they act very differently in public than in private. And something interesting that I heard when I first learned about this topic is that in public, people who are abusers are really charming. And they're like leaders. And so from the outside, like everyone loves them because they're like very generous and thoughtful. But a lot of times they're doing that because they have big egos and are very self-absorbed. And so they're very focused on making sure that everyone likes them. I'm not saying that everyone who is a people pleaser is an abuser, but that's what makes abusers so dangerous, because on the outside they just look like a people pleaser, and they're very nice to everyone, and a lot of times they are in positions of power. And so the signs of abuse, you're not going to always see them in public, but these are things that you should be looking for when you're one-on-one with them, or when they are in a comfortable environment like at home, where they aren't around strangers or a lot of people that they don't know. And so we've brought this up in the podcast before, but one of the biggest signs is when they have a sense of entitlement. And so a lot of times this starts at an early age, where their parents or people who took care of them gave them a lot of things. And so maybe they were never punished when they did something wrong, or maybe they were given money whenever they needed to buy something at home. And so I want to be very clear, I'm not saying that if you were spoiled growing up, you are an abuser. But when you develop this sense of entitlement and you expect certain things from certain people, then that's how abusers think, because the abuse, it doesn't come from nowhere. They don't go home and say, oh, I feel like abusing my partner. It's because they expected something that they were going to get, and then they didn't get it. And so all of a sudden they're taking out that anger on you in the ways that we mentioned.
I think, Ethan, as we're like kind of talking about this more, I'm trying to feel not very called out. Because like I said, like I've probably exhibited some of these things on this list. But I think like a big thing, like a distinction, I guess, to make is like what makes you an abuser versus like, oh, you're just a person and you're working through your stuff and trying to do better, is like, yes, the intention, I guess. But I think it's also about like how you're reacting when you're angry. Like it all comes down, it all like boils down, like all the abusive things that we're saying, like emotional abuse, like physical abuse, like sexual abuse, like all of those could boil down to like, this is my outlet for like how I'm dealing with my anger. So I feel like, you know, if you're listening to Ethan talk and you're feeling like, oh man, I'm a people pleaser, like I was spoiled growing up, like does that mean I'm abusive? And like, you know, we don't want people to go feeling like super terrible about themselves, because it's about like, what do you do with that feeling?
Exactly.
Especially in moments when you're angry, like.
Right. And so I think this is like, we need to be careful with this, because I remember when I was first learning about abuse, I felt the same way. And I felt very called out. I was like, oh, shoot, am I an abuser? And
I'm really happy you said that. So it's not just me feeling it.
No. And I think a lot of people watching this, like, I think the main feeling that you're going to be feeling is, like, being called out. But I think it's important for us as, like, people who are trying to do relationships well to feel that, and then also just understand the gravity of the situation that we're talking about. So even if you're not an abuser, you understand just how serious this is, and also how easy it is for some people to fall into this. And of course, like, everything is also on a spectrum.
Right.
So we're not saying like every time like you don't want to eat what is in front of you, that you are entitled, and then you say something mean and that means you're abusive. I think what Sania said is really important. Like, tied to the signs, we're looking for like actual forms of abuse where you now are physical, where now you are
verbally abusive,
exactly,
like lashing out.
Exactly. And so, like, even for me, like I have many moments where my words are not kind.
Yeah, same.
And I'm very ashamed of that. And I hope that, or I'm going to actively work understanding this now, so that I'm not taking it out in one of those harmful ways.
I just, not to deviate too much from the main point, but like, you know, you were kind of explaining like a feeling of remorse. Like, I did this bad thing and like I'm resentful about, or like I'm upset about it. I feel guilty about it. I want to do better. Like, I don't want to make this other person feel bad. Yeah. So it just so happens I was watching a TV show yesterday, and like they were showing like physical abuse, like husband and wife, like behind closed doors, and like as he was like, I don't know if this is like too explicit, you can bleep it out, but as he was like hitting his wife, like he just kept like, he was a little bit drunk too, and he just kept like screaming at her, and he was like, why are you making me do this to you?
Oh my gosh.
Like, it's called Warrior. I don't know, it's on Netflix, people can watch it, it's on season 2, but like so it felt when I was watching that like, you know, maybe this guy's also remorseful. And I feel like that's when everything gets, don't look at me like that. That's when everything gets so confusing, because like, you know, like everyone's probably seen This Ends With Us, like that movie with Blake Lively. Like, you know, I feel like when these things happen, like the person shows remorse after. They will hit you, and then the next day they'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, that's not who I am, and da-da-da-da. And then they'll go and do it again. Because, like, why would women stay, or, like, anybody, why would anybody stay in a situation like that, you know? It's because they have to show that remorse so that they can keep you stuck. Like, I think the reason, like, toxic things or abusive things are, like, the way that they are, it's not because it's all bad and this person's evil and they're always going to be entitled and they're always going to be like this and that. It's because they show you the other good stuff. So it's hard to separate that behavior from, like Ethan said, like, hey, like, we're not bad people, like, sometimes bad things happen, but I'm not a bad person. Like, how do you... Yeah. Like, that's very tricky to figure out.
Yeah, and so that, like, we need to get into the other signs for that. But I will point out, Sania, that to be very clear, what happened in that show, it happens a lot in real life, but that person is actually not really showing remorse. So when they're saying, why are you making me do this? They're focusing all on their partner, not on themselves. And so they're saying, it's a very accusing way of talking. Why are you? And they're blame shifting. And I know this because I've done this myself. And I'm very good at shifting blame, which is like a terrible thing to do. And it's important to like own what I'm doing. And so
I think that's what makes you not an abuser, Ethan. Like, one of the things that makes you not, well, it's because you're owning, you know, you're using your I sentences and you're saying, like, I'm doing this and I'm not happy about it. Right. I don't think an abuser would ever admit, like, I'm an abuser, or like, I do this bad thing and I'm like, you know, like, they would never take ownership of it.
Yeah, I think so. But I think my main point is that, like, the reason why abuse it happens in cycles is because abusers are using strategies to get you to feel like they're remorseful. So when you blame shift, it like comes off a little bit as, oh, I don't mean to do this, or like maybe they tell you the next day, like, I didn't mean to do that. But then the consistency is there because they will abuse you, and then they will say that, and then they will still abuse you the next time. And so
I think, like, not seeing changes in behaviors is like one big difference between an abuser and somebody who's just, you know, trying to do better. Like, if you keep finding yourself feeling the same way in the same situation, like, you know, no change in how they're reacting when they're upset, like week 1 versus week like 36, like, that's when you know you're like stuck in a cycle and like this person's not going to change and they're just continuing their same thing. I feel like if from week 1 to week 36, like, you know, maybe the person's silent treatments have gotten less and maybe they're trying to talk more through them, even though it's hard for them. Like, as long as you're seeing a positive slope in their behavior, maybe they're not an abuser because they're trying to do better.
Right. And one of the signs that someone is abusive is that they lack remorse. And I want to be very clear about what remorse looks like. Remorse is always going to push you to change. And so sometimes that change is slow. Sometimes like it won't happen right away. But like someone who is abusive, they're not actually gonna want to change. They will say whatever they can to keep you. And
sorry, I'm very glad that's how you define remorse.
Yeah.
Because like I would think, you know, just reading it, like remorse would be like, oh, are they sorry? Are they coming to you and apologizing and getting you an I'm sorry gift and making you dinner? And it's like, that's not remorse. There has to be change.
Right. Because a lot of times when someone says, I'm sorry, there's so much that they're not telling you in that 2-word statement. For example, if I say, I'm sorry for what happened last night, maybe I'm sorry that I got caught. Maybe I'm sorry that the situation didn't go exactly how I wanted. But am I actually sorry about hitting you? Am I actually sorry about saying very cruel things about you and your family? You can only tell if there's change involved in that. The action needs to match the words. And so I'm not saying to like just ostracize or like kick out or cancel someone who says I'm sorry, but make sure that their actions can back it up. And so one thing that I want to add to entitlement, so I talked about people who are kind of spoiled growing up. That's not what I want to focus on. I'm really talking about people who are dominating. And so
they're like entitled to the other person, to the partner.
Exactly.
Not entitled about like, oh, what food am I going to eat?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it can be related,
right.
But it's like, oh, I need to know where you are at all times. I need to know like what you're spending money on, and
like feeling entitled to their life, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like not treating them like a person on their own.
Yeah.
Kind of treating them as somebody that's just there to like serve them.
Exactly. And so sometimes this comes out in very subtle ways. Like they will tell you what to wear, and like I want you to wear this and that. Like you should never be showing your shoulders when we're outside, or how dare you wear those shoes that are dirty when we're going out for dinner together. They're very controlling, and this can come out in very subtle ways.
Yeah. Or like if you want to do something, or like you're both working and you're always asking them to like sacrifice their work or their desires or their things that they want to do to, you know, soothe whatever you need.
Right. It's a very I deserve mentality.
Oh yeah.
Right? They will say things like, I am making more money. I am bringing money home for us. So you should be the one who is buying the groceries. You should be the one who's cooking
and cleaning.
And so that is important.
It's like they've like made up their minds about like certain expectations that they have, and they're imposing those expectations on you.
Right.
There's no discussion about like, hey, what should we do? It's like, I think I'm doing this and I deserve this, and now you need to deliver.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, because sometimes you go into a relationship with certain expectations. That's not wrong. And we talked a lot on this podcast about talking about them. And so I like what you said, Sania. Someone who is abusive is not willing to have those conversations because they're dead set on what they expect.
Like their relationship is very one-sided and like self-serving.
And then another sign of abuse is that they make threats. And so a lot of times, like if you do something, there's like very specific punishments that they will verbalize. So if you do that again, I won't let you visit your family over Christmas. Or and it almost feels like a parent grounding their kid. And
I feel like there's like also subtle ways to do it. Like, you know, like, if you're drinking, I kind of don't want to see you after.
Yeah.
And it's like still the effect is the same. You're controlling their behavior.
Yeah.
A healthy person would in that same situation communicate like, hey, when you drink, you get a little bit aggressive or it's difficult to talk to you. So I would prefer we hang out another time. As opposed to being like, if you do this, like, I'm just not going to do this or whatever. Like that seems more like you're reacting and trying to control the situation, but not in a good way. Whereas the other option of like trying to talk to them about it is like you're having a conversation, you're seeing where their head's at about it. Like, do they agree that they're difficult to talk to when they're drunk? Like, and then they get to decide, like, oh, maybe I want to see her, so I won't drink.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think another sign is that they are blind. So a lot of times, and this is what is sad about the whole situation, is that abusers are not very aware that all of this is going on. And so this episode isn't just for people who are being abused and people who are friends of people who are being abused, but if you have or you notice aspects of this in your own life, and like what we're saying kind of strikes a chord in you, then like let this be a signal, like, oh, maybe something needs to change. And I think the sad part is that abusers are not usually aware that they're doing all of this. Like it just feels natural and what they expect, but there's actually like something really wrong going on, and there needs to be something to change.
I think a big way to do that, like if you, like I feel like talking in this episode, I realized like I was abused, and I like don't think my abuser was aware that they're even an abuser. And I think like a big way to figure it out is to just like check in with the other person. I think as the abuser, like you're just so self-absorbed and so like in your own downward spiral that you're just like, you know, you're feeling bad that you're hurting the other person or that you're losing control over them, and your feelings are, it's just all about you and what you're feeling and what you're needing. And yeah, like the other person's actions affect you, but it's still focused on you. I feel like you need to take a moment to check in with the other person if you think you're possibly being an abuser, and seeing how they're feeling about situations, so that, you know, you can help identify like if you're a horrible person or if there's something you need to be doing better. And then like journaling and stuff like that is like good to like, but journaling about like, oh, what are my actions and how are they affecting other people, to help you figure out if like you're potentially the problem.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, the last thing that I want to touch on is let's say you start noticing some signs, and you are a friend, so you're like a third party, and you think your friend might be going through something that's really rough and abusive. And so how can we be a good friend to them, and what can we do? What are things that we can say or questions that we can ask to figure out? And so I'll start us off. Some things that I learned that I think are really helpful is sometimes you learn because they told you a story, like, oh, this happened last night, but it's not a big deal because they're trying to like protect their partner.
Right, yeah.
And so I think the main thing that you want to do is understand what it felt like to be in that room. And so I think a good question that like I've learned is, what words were said in that conversation? And so it's a very objective question, because it'll be easier for them to just say exactly what happened, and you can decipher like the words that they're saying. I think a lot of times when you're talking to a friend who is being abused, they might not give you a subjective answer.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, for the what words were said, I feel like if I was being abused, I would just leave out all the really nasty words that already made me feel bad.
Well, that's the thing. Like, a lot of times the words might not be nasty in and of themselves. Okay. I think what I'm saying, Sania, is that the objective question is actually better. Because if I asked, how did you feel? Then they might hide it and say, it was okay, like I deserved it, like I didn't do this and that.
Right, okay.
If I ask them something that's very clear, like what words did you guys use, then even if they try to hide it,
it'll come out.
I think so.
Okay. Even like, I feel like even asking like what happened, or like being like an actual attentive listener to what your friend is saying, like you can just start picking up on like patterns. Like, you know, like let's say your friend used to go out with you all the time and then they got into a relationship and now they don't go out. Or like, let's say that your friend is now dating somebody who's like, I don't know, who's vegan or something like that. Mm-hmm. And now they have stopped eating those kinds of foods. Like, that's like a controlling behavior. So it's your job to check in on your friend. Like, you know, you can ask why questions. I don't think why questions are like, it's like, oh, why don't you want to eat chicken today? Like, you love going out for wing night. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
You know, like, just reminding them of like their past behavior and like not necessarily relating it to their new partner, but just like seeing what reasoning do they give? What is the story, the narrative that they have in their mind that they're telling themselves? And then you, as like the objective person, can kind of be like, is it right to change like the way you live your life for somebody you're seeing?
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's great. It's a very like clever way to bring to their attention, hey, something has changed.
Like just checking in and making sure that the stuff that they're doing is the stuff they want to do.
Yeah.
Or like, is it something that they're convincing themselves that they want? Like finding out the reason why are they doing this? Why are they not going out anymore? Oh, because I'm in a relationship and like I just don't feel like it. Or is it like, oh, I've just been tired and busy and prioritizing my health and sleep and that, like, you know?
Yeah.
Like hearing what they have to say for like, what is the reason why that they're doing certain things?
Yeah. And then I think also the other thing that you want to observe is if they keep defending their partner, it's a sign that they're being gaslit into doing that. Like, you can defend your partner and talk or be nice about your partner, but if someone brings up like a constructive criticism and they're like, oh, how come like your boyfriend doesn't help you around the house more?
Right.
Like something like that is a genuine question. It's not like super critical, but like if they keep defending themselves and they're like, oh, it's my job.
Oh,
like,
it's because he earns more. Exactly. Like, again, the reason is what makes it like, okay, like she's not in a good headspace because like she's telling herself because she doesn't earn, so it's her job to do this, like for him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the alarm bells should be going off.
I feel like it's a very difficult topic to broach with a friend. I feel like the biggest thing that you can do is just like be there and you have to listen. And like, you know, even I was just thinking about physical abuse, like nobody would very openly talk about it. Right. If they are being physically abused, like even if you noticed a bruise here or there and like you're like, oh, like how'd you hurt yourself? Like, I think like you just have to constantly be there for when they're ready to talk about it. And yes, you can ask probing questions and maybe that will make them, you know, talk about it. But I don't think you could ever be the one to accuse their partner like, oh my God, he's terrible, because then you might lose your friend.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times friendships could end because they're like, oh, he's against my partner. Like, I can't be his friend anymore.
Yeah. Or something like physical abuse, though, there's always signs.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think for you as a friend, it's important to just be observant. So you can ask a question like, oh, how come you're always wearing hoodies now? And like, how come you don't wear dresses anymore? And something like, because if there is physical abuse, they will try to hide it.
Yeah.
And it will be doing something like wearing baggy clothes or wearing lots of makeup or not going out as much. And so, like, if you see something more than once, it's worth just bringing up the question.
I like the how come question, Ethan. So I think it makes me feel like if you think that your friend might be a victim of abuse, like you're just going to notice changes in their behavior from before. And like people are allowed to change. We're like, you know, we kept talking about changing and getting better, but like it's really important to understand what the reasoning that they're telling themselves and telling you for like why they want to change.
Right. And I want to be clear, like, let's say I ask, how come you're wearing baggy clothes all the time? Like, you used to, like, wear lots of T-shirts. A lot of times, they're still going to hide it. And they'll say, oh, I just like this style now. Let that be a sign to start asking more questions. It doesn't have to be super accusatory, but it could be like, oh,
let's wear these matching tank tops together and go to this concert.
I was going to say, like, I don't even know. I'm like, maybe like, can I hang out with you and your partner sometime? Or have you guys been in a fight recently? And try to like start digging a little deeper and see if they keep deflecting or defending themselves.
Like, I think it's not a good sign if they're never ever talking bad about their partner.
Yeah.
But I do think, like, you know, to maintain their respect, you shouldn't go out there and badmouth your partner to anybody who's willing to listen. That's not respectful either. But I feel like, you know, you can, like Ethan said, in a respectful way, be like, oh, like, yeah, he's still, like, I don't know, like, oh, he hasn't taken me out for dinner in a while, but, like, I hope he will. Like, I know he's just been like, you know, you can point out a bad thing also without calling him a bad person. Mm-hmm. But if they never, ever do that, like, I just caught myself. I was like, oh, he's just busy, da-da. They need to be able to tell you one bad thing about them without an excuse. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, like, maybe their partner is super perfect and, like, meeting all their needs and everything is great, but, like, they should still be able to look at their partner, like, with objective eyes.
Yeah. I think there's two last things that I want to say. One is that I've heard, and I think this is true, that abuse during dating looks very different than abuse during marriage.
I can imagine.
Which is, like, really scary, because a lot of the forms that we of abuse that we mentioned earlier, they occur very obviously during marriage because there's no hiding. Like, everything just comes out. But in dating, like, your partner's not saying they won't, but they're most likely not going to be hitting you, like, in your apartment or something like that. Right. And so
they don't have as much control. Like, in marriage, like, you're locked in more.
Yeah.
So, like, they're less scared that they're going to lose you. Like, I'm just thinking about when I was or in an abusive relationship, like, we were just, like, roommates. Like, you know, like, there was there was a lease, but, like, other than that, there's an easy out.
Yeah.
But in a marriage, like, the easy out gets harder. So you can show more bad behaviors because you know the other person, it's harder for them to leave.
Exactly. And so when you're dating, it's important not to look at the different forms of abuse, but start looking at the signs of abuse. Because the same signs will be there even when you're dating. Signs that, like, they feel like they deserve things, that they're being controlling, that they are always blaming you and not taking responsibility for their actions.
And that they never say, like, oh, I messed up, I did this wrong, I should do better. Like, that they're blind and not self-aware.
Right. So look out for those things when you're dating. And then when you're married, still look out for those things, but then you're going to see the actual forms of abuse. But we're trying to catch them before you get married. And then I think the last thing that I want to say, and, like, I want to be very honest. Like, I walk away from this episode and I'm like, oh, I need to do better.
No, me too. Like,
no one is perfect. And, like, even if, like, you don't do, like, every single one of these things, like I have a tendency to, like, be very mean in my words or, like, give silent treatment if I'm upset about something. So I walk away from this episode saying, like, oh, there's things I need to work on too. And so we're not trying to, like, make anyone feel bad or, like, be in the dumps, but let this, like,
we're just pointing out the signs. And if you feel like you're exhibiting them, like, because, like, I'm also walking away from this and I was like, wow, I need to do better.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you are sharing the same sentiment.
Yeah.
And I'm just, like, taking it and I'm like, you know, like that example that we gave about the threatening and, like, the drinking alcohol, I was like, there's, like, a bad way to deal with it and to explain yourself and what you ask for, what you want. And then there's a good, better way to deal with it, a healthy way that's not abusive. So I guess my takeaway is, like, it's easy to flip on the side of being abusive for any situation, but it's also easy to flip the other way. It just boils down to, like, how are you communicating yourself, especially when you feel your needs are not being met.
Okay. So we're going to wrap this episode up by asking ChatGPT, how do you tell if someone is abusive? And we're going to see if ChatGPT's advice is consistent with ours and what things we agree with, what things we disagree with. And so over here, okay, we have it here. So ChatGPT has a list, and I'll read the very first paragraph. So ChatGPT says, it can sometimes be difficult to recognize abuse, especially when it doesn't fit stereotypes or if you're emotionally involved. Abuse can take many forms: physical, emotional, verbal, psychological, sexual, or financial. Here are some common signs to watch for. Okay, so the first one, controlling behavior. I think we agree with that. That's something that we talked a bunch about.
I noticed on the list they talk about they monitor your phone. I know at some point, like I wanted to look at my partner's phone, you know? But then I talked to Ethan about it, and we decided, like, that was not the healthiest option. The healthiest way to squash my curiosity. The better way is to just talk to them and ask them.
Yeah. And the word monitor suggests that this is a...
continuous.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, next one, isolation. Oh, interesting. I think this one, I actually agree with this one. We didn't talk about this one so much. But they discourage or prevent you from spending time with friends, family, or supportive people. Yeah, I think this is definitely true.
And they make you feel guilty for having relationships outside of, like, that one with them.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, maybe I've dipped my toes into this a little, and I'm just like, you know, because, like, you love your partner and you want them to be all about you and, like, be with you all the time, but, like, you have to understand that they're a separate, like, an individual person.
Yeah.
They were before you, and they, you know, even though you could be a married couple, but, like, they're still an individual person.
A lot of times when you're letting them be with people who are important in their lives, you're helping them be better. Even in your relationship, because they're getting time to
reflect and think about
talk
stuff.
about their feelings and get good advice. And so isolation's never the answer. Like, they should not be sticking closer to you. Like, they should have a very full life even outside of you, and that doesn't have to take away from your relationship. Okay, the next one, emotional manipulation. Here we talked about this one. Using or blame shifting and then gaslighting.
I read using words like that never happened. Like I think, in the toxic relationship or abusive relationship that I can remember, there was always an argument about, oh, that never happened. I never said that. Your memory sucks. You can't remember.
Oh, dang.
And, like, at some point I was like, like, how do I even remember anything I learned in school if I can't remember this? Like, I actually believed it for the longest time in my life.
Dang.
Because, like, that's what I would hear every single time. I feel like, again, trying to think about, like, I feel like I could say that to someone now, having been the victim of it. But I feel like a healthier way to say that and be like, oh, I don't remember us talking about this. Like, maybe I forgot. Like, instead of, like, accusing them, like, that never happened.
And also, like, the phrase, you're too sensitive, or you're being too sensitive, that's huge.
That is very huge.
Because they're saying, I'm justified for what I'm saying. You need to adjust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a healthy thing instead. Like,
oh, I could have said that in a nicer way.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I'm trying to say. And I understand, like, I was too harsh.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay. The next one, verbal abuse. Yeah, definitely. I like this.
They use sarcasms and jokes to tear you down.
We've talked about this a bunch of times.
Confirmed my relationship that I was talking about was super abusive.
Oh, man.
That's crazy.
And I think one thing that...
Because people let sarcasm just, like, slide. They're just like, oh, but, you know, I'm just kidding. Like, I just joke like that. Like, that's just how I talk. And it's like, I've told you repeatedly, it makes me feel bad. Like, joke a different way. Like,
I think something that this is, like, making very clear to me is, like, we've been focusing on, like, abusive relationships when you're in a romantic relationship. Oh. But friends, like, can do this. And this
is
like...
my abusive one that I'm talking about, it's totally with a friend, like, with the next roommate. Like...
Yeah. And this is important for everyone to know, like, when people act like this to you, these are not healthy people to be around. Yeah, in general. The next one, threats and intimidation. So we talked about this too, like making punishments.
Invading your personal space. Crazy.
Yeah. The next one, financial control. So this is something that, like, I don't understand as much, but this is, like, kind of crazy that they can try to, like, restrict you from using money.
I feel like financial control could be any way. Like, it could be just, I think it's just using finances as a way to keep you in their life. Like, with this ex-roommate that I'm talking about, we had like unresolved bills like after we moved out, and like it had been like 3 or 4 months after, and like anytime I tried to talk to her about it to like settle it and like, you know, pay each other whatever was owed, her answer would always be like, well, let's just meet up and talk about it. Let's FaceTime. And I was like, I don't want you in my life. Like, that's been made pretty clear. Like, and so she was using finances as a reason to like still have control over my life and still try to talk.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, they can use something that they owe you to
just keep you stuck.
Wow.
Basically, they just want to have control. It feels like they just want to decide when they see you and decide what you do and stuff like that.
That's scary. Okay, next one, physical abuse. So this is like the first one on the list, something that we hear of the most often.
I'm surprised to see on the list that it says they destroy property. Or like, you know, like as a way to harm you. Like, I never thought about that. I thought physical abuse is always their putting hands on you.
Oh, yeah.
But it says like destroy property or harm pets. Like,
yeah, definitely. So I think like if you're in a fight and then they punch a wall, like, okay, I guess maybe ChatGPT is telling us that is physically abusive, but then the mental emotional effects from that are huge.
Yeah.
Like, just because they punch a wall, like, maybe they're trying to restrain themselves from punching you, but you can tell that they physically take out their anger.
Yeah, and it's scary. It's like a threat almost too. Like, it's just
Okay, the next one, constant blame. So we talked a lot about this, not taking responsibility, and I like the second one. By like, you always feel like you're walking on eggshells and you can't really be honest, or you're just gonna upset them.
You're always scared you're gonna do something wrong. And like set them off.
Oh man. So
it's not feeling too relatable.
I think so, and I think many people, or like probably almost everyone, feels like that at some point in their relationship.
But exactly. But we will want to circle back and be like, and like emphasize on the fact that, okay, are you always feeling like this, or is it getting better?
Yeah.
Is there positive slope? With this ex-roommate that I'm talking about, there was no positive slope. It just continued to stay a flat line.
Yeah.
So like, you know, we're not saying, if you feel like people are doing this to you, like cut off everyone's abusing you. Like, it's like, are they changing? Are they looking at themselves and trying to do better?
Yeah. Definitely. That's a good one. Okay, the next one, over the top jealousy or possessiveness. Yeah, we talked about this.
Again, from a friend perspective, it can feel like, they're being cute. They want to do everything with me. They want me to do everything with them. But like, you know, like this roommate like was getting in the way of my relationships at the time. She was like, you never hang out with me and da-da-da-da. So like, you have to like, it's really hard to like distinguish, I think.
Yeah.
Until you get out of the situation. Yeah.
Definitely. Something that you could do in that situation is take a trip to visit your family or like a friend
Create
somewhere.
Separation.
And then see how they react and see how you feel.
That's super important.
Yeah.
I always tell Ethan, like, because I'm from Canada, so I'm always like, whenever I go to Canada, like, that's like clarity for me.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, the next one, rapid escalation of the relationship. I like this a lot because we didn't touch on this.
We did not, no.
And so love bombing is huge. So you always want to be careful of the guys who are like, where my hug at? But then like kind of in the same vein, like a more extreme example of those kinds of guys are like the I love you guys who say that really early. And will love bombing.
I mean, it's so hard to say, like, is it too early if they say it in a month, in 3 months, in 6 months, like 1 year, like, but I think like I guess all of these boil down to like, how do you feel when they're doing this?
Exactly.
Did you feel like uncomfortable when they said I love you? Did you feel it was too soon? Like, could be that you're avoidant and you just don't ever want to say it, or it could be that they're doing it too soon.
Yeah, like it should feel like there's a natural progression.
Yeah.
So their actions and their words up to that point should have made you feel like comfortable and ready.
Yeah, that's super, super true.
A lot of times, like, abusers say, I love you too soon, because they're trying to, like, lure you in and get you in that relationship. They've become, like, obsessed with you and very possessive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Abusers are very controlling.
Okay. So next, ChatGPT summarizes what to do if you suspect abuse. So we're just going to read them out, and then if there's anything that we want to highlight, we will. So first one, trust your gut. Second one, document incidents. Third, reach out for support. 4, have a safety plan. And then 5, seek professional help. Okay. Are there any that you want to highlight, Sania?
I think document incidents is a good one that I didn't ever think about before. Like just noting down like what keeps happening just so you can identify that this is a pattern.
Yeah. I love that. And then the other thing that I want to emphasize is trust your gut. So a lot of times, like, you're going to think, oh, this is normal. Like, this happens to other people.
They're going to make you feel like you're the one who's wrong.
Exactly. But definitely trust your gut. Like, you have spent your whole life, like, raised by your parents, going through school. Like, you have good experiences to draw back from, and, like, friendships and stuff. And so if something doesn't feel right, you don't feel like you should be treated this way, that's important. Note that down. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Lots of, like, serious things to talk about, but we hope that this is helpful, and we'll get all of us to just be more intentional in our relationships and understand, like, oh, these are, like, my tendencies, this is what I can work on. But also, hopefully now we have more vocabulary and strategies for what to do if we find ourselves in these situations. And, like, we're saying this to try to protect everyone out there. So if you notice these things, like, please use these strategies from ChatGPT and make sure that you're staying safe and protected, and don't stay in those situations where you're being abused. And with that, we'll catch you guys in the next one.